I woke that morning before dawn, the soft light of the rising sun painting golden streaks across the pale walls of our bedroom. It was my 35th birthday, though I felt older. Older in a good way, like fine oak drifting towards full maturity, sturdy and seasoned by years of growth and change. My name is Celeste Matthews, and I have always loved birthdays, those perfect excuses to gather close the people you care about, to laugh a little louder, to eat sweets far beyond any reasonable limit. But this year something in the air felt taut and uncertain. When I rolled over to find the empty side of the bed, I pressed my hand to the pillow and felt the lingering warmth of his body, as though he had just slipped away moments ago. I slipped out of bed, moving silently across the carpet towards the window. The streets below were hushed, wrapped in quiet tranquility. I could almost make out the distant hum of early traffic, the faint chirp of birds beginning their morning chorus. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. Today was supposed to be perfect. I'd planned it for weeks. A small dinner at home with close friends, a homemade cake baked the night before. And then, of course, his big surprise. Alex had hinted at something special, though he refused to reveal any details. He was watching me with that secretive smile, the one that used to make my heart flutter, but lately only made me feel restless. Downstairs, I hovered in the kitchen doorway and stared at the spread he'd arranged. Bouquets of white roses and purple lilies in vases, a line of candles waiting to be lit, and a sprawling wooden table set for 6. Behind it, the cake stood on a pedestal, 3 tiers of ivory buttercream, each tier encircled by a ribbon of deep midnight blue. It was gorgeous. It was too perfect. "Morning, beautiful," Alex said from the pantry, emerging with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one, and I felt the warmth pulse through my fingers. "Happy birthday." "Thank you," I whispered, raising the mug to my lips. His eyes held something, an odd flash of guilt, maybe, or anticipation. I brushed it off as morning nerves. He kissed my temple, and for a moment, everything felt ordinary and right. Then he turned and flicked on the lights, startling me with the sudden brightness. "I thought I'd let you sleep in, but then I remembered how much you love mornings like these." We sat in companionable silence, watching the dawn deepen into day. I tried to savor each sip of coffee, each breath of gentle calm before the day's excitement began. The guests arrived as the afternoon sun dipped low, lending a honeyed glow to the house. My best friend Rachel, her husband Marcus, my sister Tori, and Alex's brother Ethan stepped inside, greeted by soft cheers and warm embraces. They carried small gifts wrapped in turquoise paper tied with twine bows. I moved from hug to hug, my heart swelling as laughter bubbled around me. For a moment, everything was perfect. Dinner was lively: lobster ravioli, crisp salad, roasted asparagus. Glasses clinked. Stories tumbled across the table, echoes rising beneath the vaulted ceiling. Just before dessert, Alex stood to give a toast. "To Celeste," he began, lifting his glass. "May every year find you brimming with laughter, love, and unexpected joy." He paused, eyes flicking to the cake. "And may this birthday be the best one yet." My heart thundered as everyone cheered. I sat on the edge of my seat, anticipation crackling through me like electricity. He blew out the candles himself, then handed me the knife. I pressed the blade into the soft buttercream and made the first slice, revealing the tender crumb within. I cut a small wedge onto each plate, placing my own piece carefully on a blue-rimmed china. I picked up the fork and paused, savoring the moment. But then I noticed it, just an edge of parchment, folded neat and tight, nestled within the cake's layers. My fingers trembled as I touched it, drawing it free. It was heavy with intrigue. I turned it over and saw fine script, Alex's handwriting. "Prenuptial agreement," it read. A hush fell over the table. I looked up, heart pounding, and met Alex's gaze, his face drained of color. Suddenly, the warm kitchen, the friendly faces, the laughter, it all felt like a mask slipping off. Betrayal stung behind my eyes, and a cold knot formed in my chest. Without a word, I unfolded the paper and felt the room spin as the clauses, the terms, the list of assets unfurled before me. Before I even understood what I was doing, I stood and dropped the cake plate onto the floor. Frosting splattered across the tiles like wounded snow. Stunned gasps filled the air. I raised my voice, shaking the paper between my fingers, my voice sharp and cold. "A prenup? In my birthday cake?" Alex opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. In that instant, I knew I would never be the same. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The silence that followed was so absolute it hurt. Rachel's fork froze halfway to her mouth, a strand of linguine clinging to the tines like it too couldn't look away. My sister's expression had collapsed into horror. Ethan shifted in his seat, and Marcus actually set his wineglass down mid-sip. The crack of the plate I'd dropped seemed to reverberate through the room, echoing through the bones of the house, through my chest. No one moved. No one breathed. Alex was the first to speak, and I hated him for it. "Celeste, I was going to tell you." "No," I said, my voice ringing like glass. "You were going to surprise me. And you did, with a prenup and a cake." "It's just paperwork," he said quickly, standing too fast and knocking his chair backward. "It doesn't mean I don't trust you, it's just a precaution." I stared at him, this man I had once believed would never lie to me, never blindside me. My chest was tight. My hands were shaking, but I would not break, not in front of these people, not in front of him. "So you waited until my birthday, until we were surrounded by people?" "Until I was cutting the to my cake. Asterisk." My voice caught on the last word. "Do you know how humiliating that is?" His face flushed. "You're being dramatic." I laughed then, a single, sharp, humorless burst that felt like it had claws. "Dramatic? You stuffed legal documents into a dessert. Tell me, was that your lawyer's idea or just your own special flair?" Rachel cleared her throat. "Maybe we should give you two some space." "No," I said, suddenly calm. "Let's not pretend this isn't exactly what he wanted, an audience, a performance." I turned to the guests, who looked mortified. "Sorry to ruin your evening, but the show's over." And I left. I didn't slam the door, though I wanted to. I walked out with slow, deliberate steps, my heels clicking over the floor with the gravity of a judge descending from the bench. The moment I stepped into the evening air, I let out the breath I'd been holding. It was sharp and ragged and burned my throat. My skin felt too tight for my body. I didn't have my coat. Or my purse. Or even my keys. But I walked. I walked down the block, past the rose bushes I'd planted last summer, past the neighbors' warm, glowing windows. I walked until the pain in my feet overtook the ache in my chest. I ended up at Rachel's house. She didn't say anything when I rang the bell, just opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, the lights were low. A blanket was already waiting on the couch, so was a glass of wine. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. I stayed with Rachel for 2 nights. I didn't call Alex. I didn't answer his messages. Each one became increasingly desperate, and that gave me some small, bitter satisfaction. But I wasn't just licking my wounds. I was reading, researching, planning. Because if he wanted a prenup, then fine, I had a clause of my own. What Alex hadn't considered, what so many arrogant, overconfident men overlook, was that I wasn't the naive, enamored 24-year-old he had married. I was 35, I owned 2 successful design consultancies. My name was on multiple trademarks. And unlike him, I kept detailed records. I also had a lawyer, a good one. Sophie Wu, former litigator and current terror of men who thought they could trick their wives into surrender. When I told her what had happened, Sophie laughed so hard I thought she might fall out of her chair. "Are you serious?" she said. "He baked it into the cake?" "Right into the middle layer," I said, "like a cursed wish." Sophie grinned. "Then I say we grant him one." When I returned to the house 3 days later, Alex looked like he hadn't slept. The dining table was cleared, the flowers wilted. The cake pedestal sat empty. "You came home," he said, relief flooding his face. "Only to pick up a few things." His smile faltered. "Celeste, please. Can we talk?" "Of course," I said. "That's why I'm here." We sat across from each other, that yawning space between us growing by the second. I was scared, he said. I've been burned before. I just thought, if something ever went wrong, that you'd want to be protected, I finished for him. But did you think I wouldn't? He looked confused. What do you mean? I pulled a thin leather folder from my bag and slid it across the table. You gave me your terms. Now here are mine. He opened it, his fingers trembling. His eyes moved across the page, growing wider with each line. You're proposing a postnup? I nodded, with very specific stipulations. If you breach the agreement in any way, I retain full ownership of all shared assets, including this house, the vacation property, and the stock portfolio you keep pretending I don't know about. He paled. You can't be serious. Oh, but I am, I said, my voice like ice. If you want to protect yourself from a worst-case scenario, so do I. Think of it as mutual insurance. This is ridiculous. What's ridiculous is ambushing your wife on her birthday with a legal document hidden in sugar and fondant. I was trying to be romantic. No, Alex, you were trying to be clever. I moved into a temporary apartment downtown the next day. It had creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and terrible parking. But it was mine. Every night, I lit candles and played classical music as I sat at the window drafting my own contingency plans. Not just legal ones. Emotional ones. Professional ones. Strategic ones. I started unraveling our accounts. Quietly, methodically. Every joint expense, every shared asset, I reviewed with microscopic precision. I found gaps. I found patterns. I found secrets. Like the small offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Like the hidden trust fund in his mother's name. Like the investment in a crypto startup made months ago without telling me. He'd been preparing for an escape long before the prenup, which meant I needed an exit of my own, one with a grand finale. Alex called me again a week later, asking to talk. I agreed. I told him to meet me at the lounge of the Halcyon Hotel, famous for its high ceilings, its mirrored walls, and its view of the city skyline. When he arrived, I was already waiting, seated by the fire with a single glass of champagne. I let him talk first. He tried to apologize, again. He tried to say the right things about love and trust and compromise. I listened. Then I asked, "Are you ready to sign my clause?" He hesitated. "You really want to put all this between us?" "You already did." He looked down at his hands. "Celeste, can't we go back?" "No," I said. "But we can move forward, if we're honest." Then I slid across a manila envelope. Inside, it was everything I'd found, every detail, every account, every password. I let it sit there like a loaded gun on the table. He didn't touch it. "You were planning this," he whispered. "I wasn't," I said, "but you were." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw fear, not of me, but of consequence. I smiled. "So here's my offer. Either we dissolve everything cleanly, quietly, and with respect, or we go public." He stared at me, stunned. "You're bluffing." I lifted my champagne. "Try me." His jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this." "Not in the way you think," I said, "but I am taking back the narrative." And just like that, the balance shifted. He picked up the envelope. But before he could open it, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a message from Sophie or Rachel. Instead, it was from an unknown number. The message read, "Nice asterisk. You don't know half of what he's hiding. Call me. Asterisk." Attached was a photo. Of Alex. With a woman I had never seen before. And a child. My blood ran cold. To be continued. For a few seconds, the hotel lounge around me disappeared. The music, the soft laughter, the clink of crystal glasses, it all fell away beneath the weight of the image on my screen. My hand trembled slightly as I stared at the photograph. Alex stood in a park, smiling down at a small child no older than 2. Beside him was a woman, tall, olive-skinned, with long, raven-black hair pulled into a ponytail. Her face was turned slightly toward him, but the warmth between them was unmistakable. Not strangers, not colleagues, something more, something intimate. And the child. He had Alex's eyes. My lungs tightened. I hadn't even realized I'd stopped breathing until I coughed, a sudden involuntary gasp for air. Across the table, Alex noticed the change. Celeste? I looked up at him, and I saw nothing familiar. I didn't speak. I stood, picked up my phone, and walked straight out of the lounge. He called my name, but I didn't turn around. The doors to the halcyon swished open, and I walked out into the cold night, into the glow of city lights that now felt foreign and cruel. I moved like a ghost, past doormen, past taxis and shoppers and lovers clutching hands. I walked until my calves ached and my heart thundered like war drums in my chest. When I finally stopped, I was standing at the railing above the river, wind slicing through my coat. The photo still burned in my palm. And then I called the number. It rang once, then again, and then... Hello? A woman's voice, calm, clear, steady. Who are you? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was distant, hollow. You don't know me, she said, but I think you've seen the photo. Where was it taken? I asked. Hyde Park. About 6 months ago I took it. I squeezed my eyes shut. Why are you sending this to me? Because I thought you should know. He's been living a double life, Celeste. I didn't know who you were until recently, but I know what it feels like to be lied to. Wait, I said. You know me? I didn't. Not until my lawyer ran his name through public databases. I found the property records, the marriage license. You're his ex? No, she said. I'm his other wife. I didn't remember much of the Uber ride back to my apartment. I think I was shaking. Not from the cold, but from the surreal magnitude of her words. Other wife. Her name was Aria Delgado. She lived in Bristol. And she had the marriage certificate to prove it. She emailed me a scan while I was still in the car. It was dated just over 2 years ago, 18 months after Alex and I had renewed our vows in Santorini. Bigamy? Sophie said once I forwarded her the evidence. He's really aiming for the Hall of Fame. She scheduled an emergency legal consult, and within hours, we had a plan. Alex hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he'd committed a felony. I called Aria back the next morning. She answered on the first ring. Why did you marry him? I asked. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just needed to know. I didn't know he was married to you, she said quietly. We met at a charity gala. He said he was divorced. He was charming, brilliant. He said all the right things. I closed my eyes. Did he ever talk about me? Not by name, she said. But he always seemed paranoid, like someone was watching him. I thought it was business stress. Now I know. There was a long silence. Then she added, he's never met his son. He sends money. But he's never once come to see him. The photo, the smile, it had all been staged, for show, to keep her happy. To keep the illusion alive. I had never felt more humiliated in my life. And yet, there was something freeing in the truth. Tant. The next time Alex called, I let it ring. Then I texted him one word, meeting, noon. My lawyer's office. Don't be late. Sophie arranged everything. We brought in a criminal defense attorney, a forensic accountant, and Aria via Zoom. When Alex arrived, he looked pale, sleep-deprived, gaunt. He didn't expect Aria's face to appear on the screen. And he certainly didn't expect the photos, the documents, the evidence spread out before him like an indictment. What is this? He said, glancing around the conference room. This, Sophie said, is the beginning of the end. He looked at me. You set me up. No, Alex, you did. I just connected the dots. I can explain. No, you can't, Sophie cut in, sliding a document across the table. You're facing felony bigamy, fraud, wire transfers under false pretenses. And if you fight this in court, we'll go public. Your reputation, your businesses, your freedom. It all goes. He blinked rapidly, sweat beading at his brow. "What do you want?" "A clean exit," I said. "You relinquish all shared assets, you sign the postnup, and you walk away. And if I don't, then Arya and I file a joint lawsuit, and the press gets the whole story." For the first time, he looked truly broken. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen. It took weeks. Weeks of paperwork, of meetings, of negotiations and verifications. But eventually, it was done. Alex signed over the properties, the accounts, the stocks, everything. He left the country before the end of the month, fleeing to Dubai under the guise of a business expansion. Arya and I watched from our respective screens as the plane lifted off. We spoke again the night after the settlement finalized. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." "You know what the worst part is?" she said. "I still believed him. For too long, even after he started pulling away." I exhaled. That's the part that haunts me, not that he lied, but that I didn't see it. "You did," she said, "eventually, and you did something about it." The spring, after it all ended, I flew to the coast. I needed air, space, a new horizon. I rented a tiny cottage on the cliffs above Cornwall, with peeling shutters and lavender bushes that danced in the wind. I spent mornings walking barefoot in the dew, afternoons sketching on the porch, and evenings wrapped in blankets with a glass of white wine. I started journaling again. Not about Alex, but about myself. Who I'd been, who I was now, who I wanted to become. Rachel visited once, bringing wine and too many sweaters. We sat under the stars, wrapped in scarves, and laughed about the absurdity of it all. "You know," she said, swirling her glass, "I always thought he was too polished. Too perfect." "You never said anything." "I didn't want to ruin things," she admitted. "You looked so happy." "Sometimes happy is just a costume," I murmured. She nodded. "But you tore it off, and I've never seen you more real. Asterisk." I looked out at the sea. "I think I finally feel like myself." One morning, months later, I received a package, no return address. Inside was a plain envelope and a tiny velvet box. I opened the envelope first. It was from Arya, a note in elegant script. Asterisk. "This belonged to me once. I think it belonged to you first. I don't want it anymore. Maybe burning it will feel good." I opened the box. Inside was a ring, an engagement ring. The same cut as mine, slightly different setting. My breath caught. It was Alex's pattern, the same proposal he'd copied for both of us. I smiled faintly. Then I walked outside, struck a match, and tossed the box into the fire pit. The flames flared, bright, cleansing. By the following winter, I was back in London, living in a loft with tall windows and a studio filled with sunlight. My consultancy had expanded. I'd launched a podcast, Asterisk, The Fine Print, about love, trust, contracts, and the hidden clauses in our lives. I received hundreds of letters from women who had been through similar betrayals. Some were raw and recent, others were decades old. All of them carried the same quiet ache, the same burning question: how do we rebuild after something like this? The answer, I learned, is one step at a time. Some days I danced around the kitchen with music blaring, laughing so loud it echoed down the hallway. Other days I cried in the shower, letting the steam hide my sobs. But slowly the pain became background noise. And eventually I remembered how to breathe without him. Then one Sunday morning I opened my email to find a message from Arya. Times asterisk, he's back in town. Just thought you should know, asterisk. With it was a link to a real estate listing. Alex had bought a penthouse in the same city, 2 miles from mine. And beneath the photo of the glass-walled tower was the name of the listing agent. Asterisk, Celeste Matthews, Realty and Design. Asterisk. I stared at it. And then I smiled. Let him walk through doors I owned. Let him drink coffee under lighting I installed. Let him spend every day wondering if the house he lived in carried my fingerprints. Because it did. And I would never let him forget it. Project be continued. Be continued. The first time I passed his building after I learned he'd bought the penthouse, I felt nothing. No spike of rage, no ache of longing, not even pity, just silence. It was a strange sort of peace, the kind that comes not from forgetting, but from finally understanding where your story ends and someone else's descent begins. And Alex was descending. That much was clear. I stood across the street from the glimmering tower and took in the mirrored glass, the heavy stone columns, the way the sunlight bounced off the facade like armor. It was impressive, imposing, and utterly hollow. Kind of like him. I sipped my coffee, turned on my heel, and walked back toward my office. Because I had better things to do than haunt his corners. At Matthews Realty and Design, we'd just secured a multi-million-pound deal with a heritage estate in Surrey, and I was knee-deep in restoration contracts, sustainability reports, and a new interior design series on YouTube that was beginning to catch serious traction. And for the first time in years, I felt like my energy was mine again. No more dividing myself between crisis control and emotional damage repair. No more smoothing over the messes of a man-child with a God complex. No more dumbing down my intelligence so his ego wouldn't bruise. I was building something, brick by brick, word by word, and for once, every inch of it had my fingerprints, my vision, my voice. That was when the reporter showed up. Her name was Elsie O'Connor. Young, sharp, with eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for exposing corporate scandals buried so deep you'd need a drill team to reach them. I'd just returned from a design consult in Chelsea when she intercepted me in the lobby. "Celeste Matthews?" she asked, stepping forward with a flash of her press badge. "I'm with the Chronicle. I was hoping you'd spare 5 minutes for a conversation." I studied her. "You ambush everyone like this?" She smiled. "Only the ones worth chasing." I considered walking past her. But something in her tone, measured, careful, too professional to be sleazy, made me pause. 5 minutes, I said. No recording. Off the record. She nodded. We sat in the cafe on the ground floor, and she opened a folder so thick it looked like a graduate thesis. "I'm doing a series on high-profile financial fraud cases that never made it to trial," she said. "Your ex-husband's name came up. A lot." I stiffened. Alex and I settled. Privately. "Yes," she said, "but some of his shell corporations didn't." That made me sit up. Elsie slid a document across the table. 3 properties in the Emirates, 2 registered to offshoots of Delverton Holdings, 1 recently repossessed, another under investigation. I blinked. "I've never heard of Delverton." "You have," she said. "You just didn't know. It's an umbrella company, used by at least 4 known aliases. All of them tie back to Alex." I stared at the paper. My name wasn't on it. Neither was Arya's. But the dates. They overlapped. They matched. And one of the addresses had been used as collateral in the post-nup transfer. That meant he'd tried to offload illegal property to me under a legal contract. I felt the nausea rise. Elsie leaned in. "If you're willing to speak on background, I think we can do more than just tell your side. We can expose everything." That night, I called Sophie. "Delverton Holdings," I said. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Silence. Then, "Where did you hear that?" I filled her in. The reporter. The fake companies. The overlap with our own assets. Sophie didn't breathe for a moment. Then she said, "This isn't just fraud. This could be laundering, or worse." "You think he's hiding more?" "I think he's only ever shown you the parts he wanted you to see." I met Elsie again the next day, this time at a private co-working space her paper rented in Soho. She had already pulled banking records, business registration trails, and a web of offshore transactions that painted a chilling picture. "This," she said, pointing to a flow chart that looked like a spiderweb on steroids, "is how he moved money between countries without triggering flags. He used consulting fees, art auctions, shell vendors. One of them supposedly paid £200,000 for, quote, interior ambiance consulting." I blinked. "What is that?" "Nothing. It's a ghost invoice. It never happened, but on paper, it looks real." I felt something inside me harden. Not fear, not yet. Rage. Not because he fooled me again, but because I knew I wasn't the only one. There were others, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds. And they all thought they were crazy, paranoid, overreacting. Elsie's story dropped 2 weeks later. It ran on the front page of the Chronicle's Sunday edition and exploded across every digital platform before noon. The man behind the mirror, inside the secret life of a duplicitous tycoon. My name wasn't in it, neither was Aria's. But the world knew, and they asked questions. Alex tried to play damage control, a half-hearted statement on LinkedIn, a post about integrity and business envy. But it was too late. Regulatory agencies opened investigations, private investors backed out, the penthouse went dark. 1 month later, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a single Polaroid of Alex, standing outside a courtroom in the Caymans, wearing handcuffs. Underneath, someone had written in black marker, "Nice claws." I laughed so hard I cried. The fallout changed everything. Investors started coming to me, women mostly, CEOs, founders, board members. They wanted my help. Not just with design, with power moves. I launched a consulting division, Claus & Company. We specialized in asset defense, contract strategy, and personal brand recovery. Our tagline? There's always fine print. We help you write it. Asterix. Rachel joined as head of media. Aria came on board as financial insight advisor. Even Sophie took equity. And just like that, the ashes of my past became the bricks of my future. One night, 6 months after the story broke, I stood in front of a crowd of 400 women at the Women in Power Gala in London. They'd asked me to give the closing keynote. I walked onto the stage in a deep navy gown, my hair swept back, no jewelry but the steel watch I'd bought myself the day the prenup burned. "Ladies," I said, "let me tell you a story." I started with the cake, with the claws, with the betrayal. I didn't cry, I didn't shake. I spoke like someone who had been shattered and rebuilt. And when I finished, the room rose. A standing ovation. Afterward, a woman came up to me, elderly, elegant, cane in hand. "My husband forged my name on a business deal in 1962, she said. "I never got to take my power back. But tonight, I felt like I did." I hugged her. And I knew, in that moment, the story was never just about Alex. It was about all of us. But still, I wasn't done. Because I had one more gift left. A final clause. And I would deliver it in person. Barclay, Tomartu to be continued. I didn't tell anyone when I booked the flight. Not Rachel, not Sophie, not even Aria. It was a quiet decision, one made over chamomile tea at midnight, with a legal folder open in front of me and the sound of the rain tapping gently against the windows. The truth was, I didn't need permission. Or a second opinion. I had spent enough time thinking about Alex, about what he did to me, what he tried to do to others. Now I needed to do this not for revenge, not even for closure. I needed to remind him that I had a voice, and that I chose when the final chapter closed. I flew to Dubai on a red-eye under a private alias and with a diplomatic courtesy arranged through a consultancy connection. I wasn't there to break laws. I wasn't there to make threats. I was there to deliver something. A letter. And a single binding legal clause. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe! Now, back to the story. The concierge at the hotel knew who I was the moment I walked through the door. My alias didn't fool him. He simply looked down, discreet, and handed me a note. "Mr. Abbott is currently at his rooftop residence. He's expecting you." I raised an eyebrow. So Alex had been watching, or someone had told him I'd landed. I took the elevator to the 49th floor, my heels silent on the plush velvet carpet. The doors opened into a private hallway lined with mirrored panels and sculptural vases. Every detail of the space screamed curated perfection, like a man trying to erase the scent of his own desperation through overpriced decor. A security guard, private, discreet, Middle Eastern descent, nodded once and opened the suite door without a word. There he was. Alex stood on the balcony, facing the skyline, a whiskey glass in hand, his shirt collar open, eyes reflecting the soft amber glow of the setting sun. He turned when he heard me, and for a moment neither of us said a word. He looked thinner, paler, tired in a way that no amount of Botox or luxury bedding could fix. The man who once strutted through conferences like a peacock had been whittled down to something smaller, something cornered, but still arrogant enough to try the smirk. "I wondered if you'd actually come," he said. I stepped forward, cool and calm. "You always did underestimate me." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Can we talk?" "Not long," I said, sitting. "I'm only here to deliver this." I placed the envelope on the table between us. Heavy, cream paper, wax seal. He raised an eyebrow. "Another clause?" "The final one," I said. "An addendum to the original postnup. A formal renunciation. You'll sign it, and it legally binds you to never contest, reference, or attempt to monetize any aspect of our marriage in any public or private forum for the rest of your life." He laughed, short and bitter. "What makes you think I'd agree to that?" I leaned forward. "Because if you don't, Claus & Company has the resources to expose every financial transaction you've hidden, including the ones you thought I hadn't seen. I've got enough to bankrupt you in every jurisdiction where you still hold assets, and this time there's no Aria, no me, no cover, just you in the fire." He swallowed. "You were always good with words, Celeste," he muttered. "No," I said. "I was always good at not using them, until I had to." He picked up the pen. "Do it," I said, "and this is the last time we'll ever speak." He stared at me for a long time. Then he signed, and I stood. "Goodbye, Alex. Celeste." I paused, just for a moment. He looked at me like he might cry, like he might apologize. Like the years, the lies, the collapse of everything he'd built had finally caught up to him. But I wasn't his confessional. I was his reckoning. And I walked out without another word. By the time my plane touched back down in London, a quiet stillness had settled over me. Not numbness, not triumph, just freedom. I threw myself back into work with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. We expanded Claus & Company into Paris and Lisbon. The podcast surpassed 3 million listeners. I gave a TED Talk that landed me a book deal. And through it all, I never once said his name again. Because the story no longer belonged to him. It belonged to me. And it always would. Time cell end of part 5. Most. The spring after I returned from Dubai bloomed early that year. Cherry blossoms swept through the city in clouds of soft pink, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself slow down. Not stop, just breathe. Claus & Company was thriving. Our offices were growing faster than expected, and our inbox was flooded with partnership requests, investor inquiries, and invitations to conferences I used to dream of attending. But more than that, it was the letters. Hundreds, thousands. Women, men, widows, survivors. Some divorced, some still trapped. Some just waking up to the gnawing feeling that something was wrong in their lives. They wrote with trembling words, with grief, with rage, with hope. They thanked me not for the glamour or the revenge, but for making space for their pain. They didn't want spectacle, they wanted recognition. I made time for as many as I could. I started a private support network, a series of workshops called Savnam's The Hidden Line. We held them quietly, safely, with lawyers, financial advisors, and therapists on hand. No press, no spotlight, just truth. And it changed everything. That May, I received an invitation from the Royal Society for Ethical Finance. I thought it was a mistake at first. The society was prestigious. Reserved for economists, auditors, and the kind of people who wore the same shade of gray suit their entire lives. But the letter was clear. Mimes asterisk. We would be honored if Ms. Celeste Matthews would join our Ethics in Asset Dispute Roundtable as a keynote contributor, bringing insight from both personal and corporate litigation experience. I blinked at the words. Me? A keynote? At the Royal Society? I called Sophie. Take it, she said instantly. Do you realize what this means? It means I'll have to wear something terrifyingly boring and talk in acronyms for 2 hours. She laughed. It means you're shaping policy, Celeste. You're no longer just telling your story, you're rewriting the rules. The round table was held in an old manor house just outside Oxford. Gilded ceilings, bookshelves 2 stories high, and a garden so precise it looked like a math equation. I stood in the green room, staring at my reflection. Navy blazer, white blouse, hair pinned up. Not armor, not camouflage, but notch presence. When I stepped out onto the stage, there were over 600 people in the room, investors, MPs, regulators, legal giants. And they listened. I spoke not as a victim, not as an entrepreneur, but as a citizen of a broken system. We teach people how to build wealth, I said, but not how to defend it from betrayal. We teach how to sign contracts, but not how to see what's missing asterisk in the fine print. And we certainly don't teach how to reclaim what's been stolen without shame. There was silence. Then, thunderous applause. After the session, a woman approached me, older, sharp eyes, a cane, again. She didn't say her name. She simply handed me a note. It read, Times asterisk. You're not done yet. He wasn't alone. Asterisk. Asterisk. It took weeks to decode what she meant. I had Arya and her forensic team begin looking into Alex's past partners. Not just romantic, business. We found 4 names we hadn't heard before, men with minor positions in his past companies. Shadow investors. Silent board members. One name stood out, Sebastian Crane. Former CFO of a shell company that had funded at least one of Alex's hidden accounts. Sebastian had vanished years ago. No press, no LinkedIn, no trace. But then, in July, an anonymous tip pointed us to a private art auction in Vienna. He was listed as the buyer's agent. And the buyer? A newly registered firm in Panama. It all smelled familiar. I flew to Vienna. This time, I wasn't alone. Arya came. So did Sophie. And Rachel, armed with a press badge and a camera crew in disguise. We walked into that auction like ghosts returned from the fire. The gallery was pristine, walls like cream silk, floors that reflected the chandelier light like mirrors. Wealth danced in every corner. Then I saw him. Sebastian. Older, thinner, wearing glasses that didn't quite hide the flicker of recognition when he spotted me. He turned. Tried to leave. But he didn't make it far. Rachel stepped in front of him. Smile, Mr. Crane, you're on camera. He froze. Arya handed him a folder. Everything you've done, she said softly. We know, we have the proof. And if you don't want to go down with him, you'll talk. His hands trembled. And then, finally, he opened his mouth. Sebastian's confession gave us more than we imagined. Alex hadn't just been running scams. He'd been part of an underground network of fraudulent real estate and tech shell corporations that funneled dirty money across continents through bogus mergers, fake divorces, and ghost consulting firms. It was a global operation. And at least 3 other women had been used as cover. 2 were now bankrupt. 1 had disappeared. We gave everything to Interpol. And within a month, arrests began. It made headlines in every language. Asterisk, the clause effect, how one woman unraveled a global financial ring asterisk. My face was on the cover of the Financial Post, The Guardian, and Time International. But I didn't celebrate. I booked a silent retreat in the Highlands of Scotland. Because justice doesn't erase trauma. It just makes space for healing. The retreat was run by women, former lawyers, therapists, survivors, people who understood the weight of being made into a symbol. I spent a week without a phone, without a mirror, without words. And it was there, standing in a circle of strangers beneath a sky too vast to name, that I finally let myself feel it all. The betrayal, the fury, the grief of what he took, and the glory of what I took back. I returned to London quieter, stronger, lighter. Not finished, not yet, but whole. And I knew what came next. Not revenge, not repair. Rebirth. Wasn't to be continued. VL. I returned to London with my feet still coated in Highland mud, my soul scraped raw and strangely refreshed. The city felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I saw its steel and skyline not as something to conquer, but something I now moved through like water. I no longer needed to prove I belonged. I had built the table, and now I was choosing who got to sit at it. Claus & Company was waiting, its offices busier than ever. Arya greeted me with a grin, Rachel hugged me tight, and Sophie passed me a thick folder with a single word scribbled in red across the tab. Nopprepanger Legacy. I stared at it, fingers curled over the edge. "What is this?" I asked. Sophie's face was unreadable. "Everything you need to start the next version of yourself." The folder contained an outline. Not for a company, not for a clause, not for a counterstrike. It was a blueprint for an institute. The Matthews Foundation for Contractual Equity, an independent nonprofit dedicated to policy advocacy, legal education, and asset protection for vulnerable individuals, especially women, elderly professionals, and young entrepreneurs. "Your voice shook systems," Sophie said. "Now you use it to reshape the architecture." I ran my fingers over the proposal. "How long have you been working on this?" She smiled. "Since the day you burned the prenup." We launched the foundation that autumn with a soft press release, an invite-only salon dinner, and a speech I delivered in a gallery of broken contracts framed like museum pieces. "I believe," I said to the room, "that contracts should never be weapons. They should be promises, built with integrity. And when they're broken, the victims deserve more than silence. They deserve structure, protection, and the power to rewrite the story." The applause was slow, then rising, then thunderous. I stepped off the stage with tears behind my lashes and saw a familiar face waiting near the bar. Not Alex. Not Arya. Someone else. Someone unexpected. Quindan. His name was Nathaniel Quinn. We'd gone to university together, back when I was still Celeste Hammond, before I married, before I broke, before I rebuilt. He'd been in the law department, known for his quick wit and even quicker exits. He was older now. Salt streaked his beard, his glasses were smarter, and he had that same dry smirk that always made you feel like you were about to get away with something. "Celeste Hammond Matthews," he said, extending a glass of bourbon, somehow even more terrifying than I remember. I laughed. "For real, Nathaniel Quinn. Still running from authority?" "Not anymore. These days, I work for it. Parliament Liaison for Regulatory Justice." "Impressive." He tilted his head. "So is what you've done. You didn't just burn the house down, you built a new one, stronger, bigger." I sipped the drink. It had to be. There was a pause. Not awkward, just honest. Then he leaned in slightly. "You ever get tired of being the symbol?" "Every day." He smiled. "Let me know if you ever want to be just Celeste again." Over the next few weeks, Nathaniel and I crossed paths more often, at legal roundtables, at advocacy dinners, even once, on a walk through Regent's Park where we both happened to be escaping our respective meetings. He never pushed, never postured. He asked smart questions, made quiet observations. And most importantly, he never once asked me about Alex. He knew, of course he did. But he didn't need to reduce me to that story. He saw past the legend. To the woman still learning how to let someone hold her hand without holding her hostage. By winter, the foundation had funded its first initiative, a free digital course series titled **** Contracts Without Silence. ***NIASC. Enrollment numbers broke expectations in less than 72 hours. We had to expand server space, twice. But what moved me most were the comments. I didn't know I was allowed to ask questions. Asterisk, I thought prenups were only for the rich. Now I see their protection for everyone. Asterisk, my husband used to say I didn't need to read the documents. Not anymore. Each comment felt like a match lighting in the dark. One by one, these people weren't just waking up. They were standing up. Then came the letter from the Crown Solicitor's office. They were formally opening a review on historic marital asset cases involving coercion, deception, or psychological abuse. And they wanted me to serve on the advisory panel. I read the letter twice. Then I called Arya. They want you to help fix the past, she said. I'm not sure I know how. You don't have to know how, you just have to be willing to try. Tance. That Christmas, I hosted a private dinner at the Institute's headquarters. Just our core team, some of the earliest clients, and a few women whose cases we'd quietly helped win. There was no press, no formal speeches. Just wine, candles, soft jazz. At one point, I stepped out onto the balcony, needing air. Nathaniel joined me, 2 glasses in hand. I brought something, he said, sliding a small wrapped box into my palm. I raised an eyebrow. Too soon to buy me jewelry, Quinn. He chuckled. Open it. I did. Inside was a pen. An antique fountain pen, restored and gleaming, engraved with my initials. For your next clause, he said quietly. I stared at it, breath caught. Not because it was expensive, but because it was acknowledgement of who I was, and who I still intended to become. The new year brought waves of motion. Claus & Company partnered with the UN on digital protections for women in cross-border marriages. The Matthews Foundation received a grant from the EU Commission. Our podcast was adapted into a mini-documentary series by the BBC. And then, one morning, I got a message. Tamara unknown number. He's been extradited. Trial date set. Asterisk. Alex. Back in the UK. I didn't tremble. I didn't panic. I simply closed the message and opened my calendar. I had a panel that day. And I would not be late. I never attended the trial. I sent a video statement instead, played behind closed doors to a jury who didn't need to see my face to feel the truth in my voice. I never said his name, just the facts, the patterns, the pain, and then the power I reclaimed. The court ruled in favor of the prosecution. He was sentenced, not just for financial crimes, but for the lives he disrupted, the systems he exploited, the women he tried to erase. That night, I didn't celebrate. I walked to the river, alone. The sky was full of stars, and I whispered into the wind, "It's over." Then I went home. I lit a candle, and I began writing again. Not a clause, not a contract. A book. The title, The Fine Print. Asterisk. The title's subtitle, What They Never Teach You About Love, Power, and Paper. Title Sino Shoch. The Be Continued. The title Sino Shoshot. The title Sino Shosh. The day my book went to print, I sat in silence for almost an hour. No music, no phone, no distractions. Just me, curled on the window seat of my loft, the London rain tapping soft rhythms against the glass. There was no champagne, no party, no streamers. Because the fine print wasn't just a book. It was a wound, a confession, a warning, a roadmap. It was the scream I hadn't let out the day I found a legal contract hidden inside a birthday cake. And now it would belong to the world. I closed my eyes, and I let it go. The release tour was quieter than people expected. No stadiums, no arena book signings. I chose small rooms, libraries, law schools, shelters. I read chapters aloud to women who didn't own laptops, to single mothers who had never seen a legal document without anxiety, to young queer couples trying to understand how to protect each other in systems that weren't built for them. and in every room someone cried. Not because they were sad. Because they'd never heard someone say aloud what they always felt. Trite, Roxas. Trite wasn't your fault. Others. The media called it a publishing storm. First printing sold out in 72 hours. Foreign rights auctioned in 19 countries. The audiobook trended globally for 6 straight weeks. But what shook me most was the letter from a judge. It arrived in a plain envelope. Inside was a single sentence. Nimes asterisk. Your story has already changed how I listen in my courtroom. Asterisk. Sophie cried when she read that line. I've spent my whole life fighting for women in rooms stacked against us, she said. And you, without ever setting foot in law school, you cracked open the roof. Then let's keep building, I said. We expanded the Foundation's legal literacy program, partnered with 2 universities, built an app that translated complex legalese into everyday English. Aria dubbed it, Truth in Your Pocket. It had over 1 million downloads by spring. One morning, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Alex's mother. She asked for 5 minutes of my time. I met her in a tea shop in Richmond, a quiet corner near the park. She looked older, smaller, but her eyes were still sharp. I owe you an apology, she said. You don't, I replied. You weren't the one who broke me. No, she agreed, but I protected the one who did. I said nothing. She stirred her tea. I read your book, twice. And then I looked back at every conversation I ignored, every lie I excused. I saw it, I just didn't want to. She reached into her coat, pulled out a box. A small, locked journal, leather-bound. I found this in his things, after the trial. I thought you should have it. I hesitated. What's inside? I think it's the first time he ever told the truth. I didn't open it. Not that day. Not that week. But one night, curled on my sofa with the fire low and the city outside my window breathing slowly, I took a deep breath and opened the lock. It wasn't a confession, exactly. It was a boy's voice, trapped in a man's mess. There were entries about fear, about never being enough, about pretending so hard it became who he was. There were also entries about me. Some cruel, some hauntingly kind, some confused. He hated how I saw through him. He loved how I made him feel whole. He feared that I would outgrow him. And then, one final line. Asterisk, she gave me everything I never deserved, and I buried her trust in sugar. I burned the journal the next morning. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need his grief. I had finally learned the difference between empathy and carrying someone else's rot. He was accountable. That was enough. That summer, Nathaniel and I went away for the first time. Not for work, not for a speech, not for a cause. Just us. A small house in the Lake District, no Wi-Fi, no press. Just long walks, louder laughter, and the kind of quiet that comes only when your soul is no longer bracing for impact. We didn't talk about Alex. Not once. Instead, we talked about books, politics, grief, art, the color of shadows in evening light. He told me about his sister, how she'd lost everything in a divorce where her name wasn't on a single document. She's the reason I went into this work, he said. But you made me believe the system can change. We held hands in the dark. No vows, no promises, just presence. When we returned to London, something had shifted. Not between us. Within me. I no longer looked over my shoulder. I no longer second-guessed my instincts. I didn't wait for another betrayal. I built, I moved, I trusted. Not blindly, but bravely. I visited Aria that autumn in Bristol. Her son was older now, full of questions, smiles. Is that the lady who helps people be strong? He whispered to her when he saw me. Aria winked. Yes, baby, that's her. He ran up to me, hugged my knees. I bent down, held him gently. "You're going to do big things," I said. He looked up. "Like build a big house?" "Bigger," I whispered. "Like build a life that no one else can take from you." Later, Arya and I sat on her porch, coffee in hand. "I never thanked you," she said. "For what?" "For not blaming me. For not treating me like a rival. For being a sister, instead." I smiled. We were both lied to. That makes us survivors. And sisters. We sat in silence. The wind brushed through the leaves. Then she said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if he'd just been honest?" I shook my head. No. Because he wasn't, and wishing doesn't build the future. By winter, the fine print had become a required text in 3 law schools. Claus and Company's advisory board now included 2 sitting MPs. And the Matthews Foundation had funded a pilot program for survivors of legal manipulation to receive pro bono defense. Every headline still shocked me. But the letters kept me grounded. Asterisk, your book saved my mother's house. Asterisk, because of you, I walked away before the wedding. Asterisk, I finally saw the clause I'd never read before. And my favorite. Asterisk, you taught me how to write my own ending. That New Year's Eve, I stood on the balcony of my loft, champagne in hand, Nathaniel beside me. The city shimmered below. Fireworks bloomed in the distance. And I said aloud, "I'm not scared anymore." He squeezed my hand. "Then what are you?" I smiled. "Ready." "To be continued." "It stresses me," I said aloud. The first day of the new year came quietly. No resolutions, no declarations. Just me, barefoot in my kitchen, stirring oatmeal and listening to birdsong. Outside, the city was slow to wake up. A fine mist hung over the rooftops. My phone, for once, was silent. It felt like permission to begin again. But beginnings rarely come without echoes of what we've endured. Because before we write new pages, we must learn to read the ones we tried to skip. And in the days that followed, a story I thought was closed flickered back to life. It started with a voicemail. From a blocked number. The voice was shaky, whispered, muffled by static. But I recognized it instantly. "Alex. Celeste, I need 5 minutes. Not to make amends, just to explain something, before it's too late." I deleted it. But something in his voice clung to me. Not regret, not manipulation. Something colder. Resignation. I told no one, not at first. Not Sophie, not Nathaniel, not even Arya. Instead, I called his attorney. She sounded surprised. He's not well. Terminal diagnosis. Pancreatic." Silence passed between us. I should have felt nothing, or at least, nothing useful. But I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply said, "Where is he?" A long pause. "Private hospice in Kent. He asked for you." I ended the call. And I packed a bag. The drive was long. The roads were slick with fog. I stopped once for petrol and tea, hands trembling slightly as I handed over coins. Why was I going? Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. But maybe for finality. Because even the worst stories deserve punctuation. And I would decide what the last sentence would be. The hospice was tucked in the countryside. A stone manor house retrofitted for quiet endings. Inside, everything smelled of lavender and antiseptic. The nurse led me down a hallway lined with pale blue doors. "Room 12, she whispered. "He's awake, but fading fast." I paused at the door, breathed in, breathed out, and walked in. Alex was a shadow of himself. Pale, hollow-cheeked, eyes sunken but alert. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he rasped, "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't." He gave a dry, painful chuckle. "Story of our marriage." I sat, setting my bag on the floor. You asked for 5 minutes, that's what you get. He nodded. Fair. The words came slowly. Each one dragged through a body already giving up. I wanted power, more than anything, because I was so scared of being nothing. I said nothing. He went on. You were luminous, God Celeste. You walked into rooms and made them yours without trying. I hated that about you, because I wanted it, and I didn't know how to earn it. I crossed my arms. So you tried to take it? Yes, a cough, a grimace. But I couldn't, not really. And the more I failed, the more I punished you for succeeding. He looked at me then. Did you ever love me? I didn't hesitate. Yes, once. He nodded. I believe you. And then he whispered, There's one more thing. He pointed to the nightstand. A thin envelope. My will, there's a clause, one I added last month. I didn't reach for it. He sighed. I'm leaving the rest of my estate to the Matthews Foundation. You'll find documentation. It's clean, verified. I had nothing left to give, except that. I blinked. Of all the things I expected in that room, guilt, confession, pain, I never expected legacy. He closed his eyes. Maybe it's cowardice. Maybe it's a last attempt at relevance. I don't know. But you'll do more with it than I ever could. I sat in stunned silence. Then finally I said, Thank you. He smiled faintly. Don't thank me. Just do something better with the wreckage. I left before sunset. Didn't look back. Didn't cry. Just drove. Back to the city. Back to the life I had built from his ashes. He died 3 days later. No funeral. No service. Just a line in the paper. No survey. Alexander Carver Matthews, 43, passed away quietly. The estate transfer was seamless. Aria verified everything. The foundation's endowment doubled. And we used it to launch our most ambitious project yet. SNOP the Clauses Project, a global legal equity program for marginalized families. Paro facto lies NOP. It opened offices in 5 countries within a year and changed thousands of lives. One night, after a press gala celebrating the project's first anniversary, Nathaniel and I sat on the rooftop of the institute, legs dangling over the edge. He passed me a flask. 2 endings, he said. I clinked it. And beginnings. We drank in silence. Then he asked, Did he get to you, that day in Kent? I thought about it. No, but he reminded me that we are more than what we leave behind. We are what we empower in others. He nodded. And you've empowered legions. I published a second book. Not a memoir. A guide. Nomeser title, The Empowered Contract. It was blunt, tactical, rooted in real-world case law. It sold faster than the first. Lawyers, judges, survivors, students. Even corporations began adding it to onboarding materials. And I realized something. I hadn't just become the woman who fought back. I'd become the blueprint. Years passed. Quietly, loudly. With awards, speeches, sunsets, surgeries, heartaches, breakthroughs. Nathaniel and I bought a house together in the Cotswolds. I kept my loft in London. I needed both movement and stillness. He proposed once. I said no. Then yes. But not to a wedding. Just a continuing. Together, side by side, without signatures. Because commitment, I learned, lives in action. Not documents. One rainy afternoon, decades later, I sat with my granddaughter Talia in my lap. She was drawing. Are you famous? She asked. I smiled. Not really. But Mommy says your name is in books. It is. Why? I looked at her. And I said, because I made sure the next generation knew how to read the fine print. She blinked. What's the fine print? I kissed her forehead. It's the part they hope you skip, but it's where all the power lives. I never visited Alex's grave. Never needed to. Because closure isn't a place. It's a decision. And I made mine every single day. To speak. To write. To protect. To love again. To live on. To be continued. Timur earlier saksak. The year I turned 50, I held a pen in one hand and a gavel in the other. The pen was mine, engraved, silver, the one Nathaniel had given me the night I signed the papers to form the Clauses Project. The gavel belonged to the Ethics Tribunal of the European Commission. Because that spring I was sworn in as an independent counsel for contract reform across all member nations. My task? Simple in theory, radical in execution. Redesign the default assumptions around marital, business, and power of attorney agreements with an equity-first lens. In plain terms, tear up the playbook that once tried to write me out of my own life. "You're really doing this," Rachel said from the other end of the phone, as I walked through the marble atrium of the Justice Building in Brussels. I smiled, dodging diplomats. "I am. You used to carry a purse with a hole in it, Celeste." "I still do, just with better pens." We laughed. It was absurd, beautiful, surreal, and absolutely earned. The work was grueling. Every policy I proposed had to be vetted, debated, translated, litigated. Every clause dissected. But slowly, piece by piece, we rewrote. Standard prenup templates to include mutual growth clauses. Civil union contracts that respected non-traditional family models. Inheritance protocols that protected long-term partners regardless of marital status. Mandatory educational resources provided before any binding legal agreement. I called it the consentful contract framework. Others called it radical. I called it overdue. At home, life had settled into something warm and steady. Nathaniel lectured twice a week. I still kept my corner office in the London loft, though I spent more time on trains than behind my desk. The foundation ran itself now, staffed by brilliant, passionate people who were once the very clients we served. And Claus & Company had expanded into Asia, led by Arya from her new base in Singapore. We spoke weekly. She was thriving. Her son, Javi, now a teenager, had started shadowing her at meetings. "You created a ripple," she told me one day. "He doesn't just know what justice means, he expects it." On my 51st birthday, I returned to Santorini, the place where Alex and I had renewed our vows. The place I'd once cried so hard on a bathroom floor that I'd broken a hairbrush into. I hadn't been back since. But this time, I came alone. Not for penance. For reclamation. I booked the same villa, wore white linen, brought nothing but a journal and silence. And on the second morning, as the Aegean breeze kissed my skin, I stood on the terrace and whispered, "I am not afraid of memory anymore." Then I danced. Alone, barefoot, and free. The book offers kept coming. Some wanted another memoir. Some wanted fiction. Some wanted me to turn Twen Snake Bav, the fine print, into a streaming series. I declined. Not because I wasn't honored, but because some things deserve to live in pages, not pixels. Instead, I focused on building one last gift. Nibes the Clauses Archive, a digital, interactive repository of anonymous contracts submitted by users around the world. Each contract was analyzed, decoded, and paired with educational notes and suggested edits. The archive exposed patterns, predatory clauses, cultural blind spots. It became the most used contract literacy tool in the world within 6 months. The tagline? Times asterisk. Read the fine print. Or let us read it with you, asterisk. Then, one spring morning I received a letter. From a young woman in Ohio. 19, working 2 jobs. Engaged to someone who just presented her with a prenup she didn't understand. She used our app. Read the community stories. Asked for help. Walked away from the relationship. Now, she was applying to law school. At the bottom of her letter, she wrote, asterisk, I'm going to be the next Celeste Matthews. Only louder. I cried. Ugly cried. Then I emailed her back. Asterisk, be louder, be braver, and when they tell you to sit down, build your own table. Asterisk down. That year, I gave my final keynote at the Global Legal Conference in Geneva. The room was full of people in power, old money, new tech, policy giants, bankers. I walked to the podium without notes. And I said this: you can't protect what you don't understand. Contracts aren't just words. They're mirrors. They reveal who holds power and who doesn't. They are the battleground for dignity. And if you're still writing them in ways that silence people, you're part of the harm. The silence afterward was electric. I stepped back and left the room before the applause. Because some exits deserve control. I began writing again. Letters, notebooks, poems I never showed anyone. I picked up watercolors, took long walks, learned to cook badly and with enthusiasm. Nathaniel built a greenhouse. I filled it with lavender. We were happy. Not loudly, but truly. Talia, now grown, came to me one afternoon wide-eyed. "Gran," she said, "they're teaching the fine print in my college ethics class." I smiled. "Do they know you're my granddaughter?" She grinned. "No. I told them I just happened to love fierce women." Then she paused. "Can I ask something?" "Always." She hesitated. "What do you regret?" I thought for a long time. Then I said, "That I didn't speak sooner, but I'm proud I spoke at all." She nodded and hugged me tight. On the 20th anniversary of the Prenup and a Cake, Rachel hosted a private dinner. Just the original circle. Me, her, Aria, Sophie, Nathaniel. We drank too much, laughed too loud, cried a little. And Sophie raised a glass. To the woman who taught us that silence is the most dangerous clause. They toasted. And I finally let myself feel it. Not victory, not vengeance. Peace. Before bed that night, Nathaniel curled beside me and whispered, "Would you do it all again?" I traced the scar on my palm from the day I'd cut myself on broken glass during that long-ago birthday dinner. And I whispered, "Yes, but this time I'd bring a bigger knife." Tumsh tried to be continued. 21 years to the day after I found a prenuptial agreement inside my birthday cake, I stood before a crowd at Cambridge Law School. Not as a speaker, not as a case study, but as the subject of their new curriculum module. Times Asterisk, Applied Ethics, and the Clausal Revolution, the Matthews Doctrine. I watched from the back of the lecture hall as students dissected my contracts, quoted my books, and debated reforms I'd once written on napkins between therapy sessions and court filings. And when the professor called on a girl in the front row, long braids, sharp eyes, voice full of steel, I listened as she said, "Her story isn't about revenge. It's about authorship. She took back the pen." I left before anyone saw me, and cried all the way to the train station. That autumn, Nathaniel and I decided to take a sabbatical. We closed the house, packed 2 suitcases, and traveled. Not as icons, not as founders, just as Celeste and Nate. We walked the Amalfi Coast, got lost in Tokyo, ate mango on rooftops in Cartagena, and wherever we went, we were met with stories, whispers, thanks. People who said, "Because of you, I walked away. Because of you, I fought back. Because of you, I stayed." We wrote their names in a leather journal. It filled quickly. In Morocco, we met a woman who had translated twice the fine print into Arabic for her mother. She cried, the woman said, not because it hurt, but because it named what hurt. In Kenya, a schoolteacher approached us in a market, handed me a letter she'd laminated. "I teach this to my girls," she said. "It's our protection." In Oslo, a university gave me an honorary doctorate in human rights through legal reform. Nathaniel insisted on photographing me in the robe. I stuck out my tongue. He framed the photo anyway. We returned home to find our world had grown without us. Claus and Company now had offices in 24 countries. The Claus's archive had been integrated into 3 major government websites. And the Matthews Foundation had helped pass protective legislation in 6 new nations. My name was on documents I'd never even seen. But the mission remained unchanged. Cortadues, empower, protect, illuminate. And then, one evening, I found a letter waiting on my desk. No stamp. Just a handwritten note. Tries asterisk. You never saw me, but I saw you, and because you spoke, I didn't marry him. Asterisk. That was all. No name. No address. But I didn't need one. Because legacy isn't about who remembers your name. It's about whose life was quietly spared because you screamed loud enough for them to hear. That winter, Talia came home from her job at a grassroots media nonprofit with a question. Gran, when did you know you were done? I laughed. Done with what? With being angry. I paused. And then said, I didn't stop being angry, I just learned how to aim it. She nodded. Good, because I think I want to run for office. I choked on my tea. Local, for now, but one day. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I saw it in her eyes. Determined, grounded, bright. She was the future I had once needed. And now, she was writing it. At my 75th birthday, we rented out a library. Not a ballroom, not a yacht, a library. Because the finest chapters of my life were written there. Books lined the walls. Contracts and letters and journals filled the shelves. Friends old and new came from every continent. Arya flew in, Javi too, now a full barrister. Rachel brought photographs from the early days, some flattering, some hilariously not. Sophie arrived with a signed first edition of Asterisk, the Empowered Contract, now used as a constitutional training text in 3 countries. Nathaniel handed me a box. Inside, a replica of the birthday cake from 21 years ago. This time, the slice held no surprises. Just a note. Times asterisk, you turned sugar into steel. That night, after everyone had gone, I wandered the stacks alone and found myself in front of the original contract. Framed. Preserved. The prenup that started it all. It hung next to the postnup I'd drafted, and below it, a plaque. The fine print that rewrites the world. I touched the glass, and I whispered, let no woman ever be silenced by ink again. A month later, I was asked to give one final speech. At the United Nations. The topic? Knife gender and legal literacy in a changing world. I wrote the speech longhand. Carried it in my coat. And when I stepped onto the blue and white marble stage, I looked out at the flags, the faces, the silence. And I began. My name is Celeste Matthews. I was once handed a cake that concealed a contract. It was meant to silence me. Instead, it awakened me. And since that day, I've learned this. You do not have to be a lawyer to understand justice. You do not have to be wealthy to deserve protection. You do not have to be perfect to be powerful. You only have to be willing to read what others hope you won't. And then, if necessary, rewrite it. The room erupted. And I let it. Because I had earned every syllable. That night, I sat in my hotel room with Nathaniel curled beside me, watching the city lights blur through the rain. He traced my knuckles. You ever wonder what would have happened if he'd never hidden that clause? I shook my head. If he hadn't hidden it, I whispered, I might never have found myself. Then I kissed him. And I finally slept through the night. Twaitredly dant one nev. There's a myth we like to believe, that stories end neatly. A clean arc, a triumphant finale, the hero standing tall. But the truth is, real stories don't end. They ripple. And 25 years after I sliced into a birthday cake and found a weapon disguised as frosting, I watched that ripple become a wave that washed over the world. I was 78 when the Global Justice Consortium announced the creation of the Knock-Matthews Directive *, a binding international recommendation for gender-equitable contract law adopted in 117 countries. I didn't speak at the ceremony. I didn't attend. I watched it on a small screen from my garden, tea in hand, lavender blooming around me. And I cried. Not because I needed credit, but because I saw a world that finally understood what I had tried to say all those years ago. Every silence written into a contract is a story waiting to scream. True. My body aged faster than my mind. My knees gave up before my pen did, but I never stopped writing. Journals, letters, advice. Mostly to young women I'd never meet, who emailed me from corners of the world still dimmed by fear. I answered everyone, until my hands shook too much. Then Talia took over. She visited every Saturday, laptop in hand, reading them aloud while I dictated from my porch chair. Tell her she's not crazy, I'd say. Tell her she's right to be afraid, but braver to speak anyway. Sometimes I'd drift off mid-sentence. She'd finish the thought. Her words were always better than mine. She won her seat in Parliament at 34. Landslide. They called her the architect's granddaughter. She laughed at that. Tell them I have a name, she told me, sitting cross-legged on my rug, campaign signs leaning against the wall. You do, I said, but never let them forget where it came from. Nathaniel passed in his sleep 4 years before me. Peaceful, uncomplicated. He left a note in my book. Asterisk. Thank you for the truth, for the fire, for letting me walk beside you. I never needed a signature. You were always mine. I read it every night. I still do. On what would have been our 15th anniversary, I returned to Santorini. Not for a vow. For a promise. I stood on the same cliff where my old life cracked open, let the wind whip around me. And I whispered, I was never the victim of a bad man, I was the beginning of a better world. Then I tossed the last piece of the original prenup, one sliver I'd kept folded in a jewelry box, into the sea. And I let it sink. The final thing I wrote was a letter, to be read aloud after my death. At my request, it was printed on parchment and bound into a plain gray folder. Talia read it at the United Nations. The room was full. Every major network broadcast it live. She stood at the same podium I had once stood behind. And in a clearer, steady voice, she read, To those who inherit the world I helped shape. You will be told you're too loud, that you're paranoid, that you're reading into things. Read anyway. You will be told that contracts are too complex, that power belongs to those who've earned it. Ask who wrote the rules. Then rewrite them. You will be told that love and trust don't need protection. Protect yourself anyway. You are not unkind for demanding clarity. You are not unloving for setting terms. You are not broken for walking away when someone asks you to sign your silence. The fine print is where the truth hides. Make them read it. Make them reckon with it. Make them answer for every word. With fire, Celeste Matthews. There was no applause. Just tears. A room too moved to pretend otherwise. My funeral was held in the same library where I once celebrated my 75th. No flowers. Just books. And a wall of contracts with edits scrawled in red ink. My edits. Rachel placed one last marker under the original prenup. Point asterisk. This clause is obsolete. Asterisk. Sophie wept. Aria read a poem she'd written. Javi stood beside her. And Talia laid a gavel on the table beside my urn. The same one I'd held in Brussels. Years later, a new planet-wide constitution adopted language from the empowered contract. Talia led the charge. And when the final vote passed, she whispered into her microphone, Dimes asterisk, we will never again be written out of our own stories. Pyrich Tyne. I was just a woman who refused to eat cake. But the world was hungry for someone to say, asterisk, no more, asterisk. And when I did, others followed. And when they followed, laws changed. And when the laws changed, lives did. That's legacy. Not a statue. Not a name on a building. 1,000 unknown hands holding pens, saying, Times asterisk. I write this for me. Asterisk the Belodi. Thank you for walking this story with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reading the fine print. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.